Hello, this is Steps in a Journey, and I'm Kathy Moore, and this is a class on the spiritual life and how to grow closer to the Lord. And we do it together. We travel together. And right now, our group is reading Confessions by Augustine. And we're going to be reading Book 9, Chapter 8. And this is the story of Monica, Augustine's mother. Book 9, Chapter 8. It is you, O Lord, who make men of one mind to dwell in a house. He's saying this because a group of his friends, after their conversion, all lived together in a villa that was donated by a friend, and his mother joined them. And it's men of one mind that do this, and maybe your prayer groups get together like this just to talk and go out to eat together, or just hang out together, go for walks together, because people of one mind hang out together. So this is not a new statement for any of us. It is you, O Lord, but he's attributing it to God, who brings the people together. It is you, O Lord, who make men of one mind to dwell in a house. Associated with us was Euodias, a young man from our home city, an officer of the court who had been converted to you earlier. Having been baptized and having resigned from secular service, he had prepared himself for your service. We had agreed to dwell together in our holy purpose, and seeking where we might most usefully serve you. We were returning to Africa. We had gone as far as Ostia when my mother departed this life. I omit much, for I hasten toward much more. Receive my confessions and thanksgiving, O God, my God, for innumerable things on which I am silent. But I will not leave whatever my soul brings forth concerning your handmaid who brought me forth, both in her flesh, that I might be born to this temporal light, and in her heart, that I might be born to eternal light. I would not speak of her gifts, but of yours in her. For she neither created herself nor educated herself. You created her. Nor did her father or mother know what a person should become from within, should come from them. It was a scepter of your Christ, the discipline of your only begotten Son, that trained her in the house of one of your faithful ones, a good member of your church. Yet she did not so much credit her mother's diligence for her good discipline as that of a certain very aged maidservant who had cared for her father in his infancy. For this reason, and because of her great age and excellent character, she was greatly respected by the heads of that Christian home, and she was given charge of her master's daughters. So this maidservant had raised her father since he was a child, and since they all loved her very much, they gave her in charge of raising their children, including Monica. And this elderly lady gave diligent care to this task, restraining them when necessary with a holy severity, and teaching them with sober wisdom. For except at those hours in which they were fed very temperately at their parents' table, she would not allow them to drink water, even water, though parched with thirst. In this way she took precaution against an evil custom adding this wholesome advice, quote, "You drink water now, because you're not able to drink wine. But when you come to be married and are made mistresses of cellars and cupboards, you will scorn water, but the custom of drinking will remain." Unquote. By this kind of instruction and the authority she had, she curbed the greediness of childhood and molded their very thirst to such excellent moderation that they no longer craved what they should not have. Yet, as your handmaid told me, her son, of love of wine had stolen upon her. When, as was custom, she was sent by her parents to draw wine out of the barrel, before she poured it into the flagon, she sipped the little wine with the edge of her lips. Her instinctive feelings kept her from taking more. She did this not out of any desire to drink, but out of the exuberance of youth, which boils over in mirthful sportiveness and is usually kept in check by the seriousness of their elders. Remember, she's just 6 years old here. Thus, by adding to that little sip, daily sips, for whoever disregards little things shall fall little by little, she had fallen into such a habit as to drink greedily her little cup almost brimful of wine. Where, then, was that discreet old woman and her most earnest prohibition? Would anything avail against our secret diseases if your healing hand, O Lord, did not watch over us? Father, mother, and guardian absent, you were present, who made us, called us, and who worked something toward the salvation of our souls by those set over us. So God is with us, over us all the time, as we just read Psalm 139, and He knows when we sit and when we stand. But He also puts people over us to guide us, to guide our souls. So what did you do then, O my God? How did you cure her? How did you heal her? Did you not bring out of another soul a hard, sharp taunt, like a lancet out of your secret armory, and remove all that putrefaction with one touch? And sometimes that's what happens to us. One remark from one person will help us. You're right. You might not admit it to that person, but you know that that person is right, and you change. For a maidservant with whom she used to go to the cellar got into a falling out with her little mistress, as often happens, and when she was alone with her, taunted her about the fault with a most bitter insult, calling her a drunkard. With this taunt, stung to the quick, my mother saw the foulness of her fault, and immediately condemned it and forsook it. Just as flattering friends pervert or lead us astray, so reproachful enemies often correct. Yet you, Lord, repay them for what they intend, not for what you do with their reproaches. That slave in her anger sought to trouble her young mistress, not to amend her. She did it in private, either by chance or out of fear that she would be blamed for not disclosing it earlier. But you, Lord, governor of all things in heaven and on earth, who turn the deepest currents to your purposes and rule the turbulent tides of the ages, heal one soul by the very unhealthiness of another, so no one seeing this, should credit it to his own power when another person, whom he wished to see reformed, is changed through a word of his. So in other words, we should not attribute to our own selves and say, boy, I just said the right thing to that person. No, it's God put that thought in your mind to say such a thing to that person. And also for us not to attribute to one person, but to God, the salvation of your soul. Chapter 9, Book 9, Chapter 9. She was thus modestly and soberly brought up and made subject to you by her parents, rather than by her parents to you. As soon as she was a marriageable age, she was given to a husband, whom she served as her Lord. She did her best to win him to you, preaching you to him by her way of life, by which you made her beautiful in his eyes, reverently amiable, and even admirable. And she so endured her infidelities as never to quarrel with her husband about it. For she looked for your mercy on him, that believing in you he might be made chaste. But besides this, he was hot-tempered, both in affection and in anger. And she had learned not to resist an angry husband, either in deed or word. Only when he was soothed and tranquil, and in a mood to receive it, would she give an account of her actions, if by chance he had been angry without reason. In a word, while many wives who had more gentle husbands bore even on their faces marks of blows, and would blame their husband's action in private conversation, my mother would blame their tongues, giving them, as if in jest, this earnest advice, that from the day they heard the marriage contracts read to them, they should consider them instruments whereby they were made servants, and so remember their condition. They should not set themselves up against their lords. When the others, knowing what a moody husband she endured, marveled that it had never been heard, nor in any way suggested that Patricius had beaten his wife, or that there had been any domestic difference between them, even for one day, and confidently asked the reason, she taught them her rule as I have just given it. Those wives who observed it found help and thanked her. Those who did not observe it found no relief from their suffering. So this chapter is about her relationship with her husband. She never corrected him for his adulterous affairs, his infidelities, but she felt that the Lord would change him, and by knowing the Lord would correct him. She also felt that since she was married to him, she was his servant, and she never argued with him when he was mad, when he was bawling her out for some offense. But when he was quiet and good-natured, then she would tell him what really happened and why she did such and such. Because the women would get together and talk, and some of them, with gentler husbands, would come with blows on their faces. And she would say, don't argue with a mad, angry husband. Just leave it be until he's through with his anger. And those who listened to her thanked her for it, and those who didn't listen still suffered. This next paragraph is about her mother-in-law. But this last paragraph, we learned that her husband's name was, and Augustine's father's name was Patricius. Her mother-in-law also became angry at her through the whisperings of evil servants. It's so sad that there are so many people who are jealous of people. They just can't, their demons inside them cannot stand the spiritual Holy Spirit within Monica. And so they would whisper against her to the mother-in-law. And jealousy and envy is a terrible, terrible sin. And a lot of people have ruined their relationships over it and even murdered. Many of my CSI movies that I watch, the reason why they killed somebody was out of envy or jealousy. So her mother-in-law became angry at her because of the things that people were gossiping. They would go to the mother-in-law and complain about it. But she was so overcome by my mother's persevering endurance and meekness that of her own accord she told her son about the meddling tongues who were disturbing the domestic peace between her and her daughter-in-law, asking him to correct them. In keeping with his mother's wishes and with a view to the good order of his household and the harmony of its members, he had those who were guilty corrected with stripes. In other words, he had them whipped. At the same time, his mother promised to do the same to any who should speak ill of her daughter-in-law to her, to please her. And now, none daring to do so, they lived together with remarkable sweetness and mutual kindness. And that's the way it should be with family. They shouldn't be complaining one to the other, against each other. It shouldn't be setting one against the other, and it's sad when that happens within a household. And also it's sad within an organization when one member goes against another and brings the others against another a member of the organization. It falls apart, but there's harmony when everybody gets along and no one listens to the complaints of others. You bestowed another great gift on that great good handmaid of yours, my God, my mercy, in whose womb you created me. Between my disagreeing and discordant parties, where she was able, she showed herself such a peacemaker that when she had heard from both sides of a controversy, such bitter things as growing and unresolved feelings are apt to be belched forth, when to a present friend the rawest enmities are breathed out by an acid tongue against an absent enemy. And isn't that the truth? Is when the person is absent, we can say some pretty bad things against that person. She would never disclose anything about the one to the other, but that which might lead to the reconciliation. I might think this is a small good if I did not know to my grief the incredible number of persons who, through some horrible and widespread contagion of sin, not only disclosed to persons mutually angered things that were said in anger, but even add things that were never said at all. And so you talk about, well, this is what was said in anger, and then you even add to it things that were not even said at all. And we're all guilty of that at some point in our lives. It is no great thing for a humane person not to foment or increase ill will by ill words, but rather he should endeavor by good words to quench it. Such a person was she. You yourself were her most inward teacher, instructing her in the school of her heart. My grandmother was the same way, in which if any of her kids or someone would go to her and complained to her, she would just smile and she says, "Oh, isn't it too bad that they aren't all saints like us?" Just making them realize that we all make mistakes, because we aren't all saints. Finally, toward the very end of his earthly life, she won her own husband to you. Never did she complain after he became a Christian of what she had endured from him before he was a believer. She was also a servant to your ministers. Any of them who knew her praised, honored, and loved you in her. For through the witness of the fruit of a holy life, they perceived your presence in her. She had been the wife of one man, had honored her parents, had governed her household piously, was well known for her good words, for her good works. She had brought up her children, travailing in labor with them whenever she saw them swerving from you. Finally, since you allow your servant to speak of your favor, as though she had been a mother to us all, she took care of all of us, your servants. O Lord, before she fell asleep in you, we lived united together, having received the grace of your baptism, and she served us as though she had been the daughter of us all. So she never complained or brought it up to her husband, his past life, once he became a Christian, because she felt that that was the life of a non-Christian. Now he's a Christian, it was changed. It's almost like going to a class reunion. You might think of things they did in high school, but now they're grown up, they've changed, they're matured, and they don't do those things anymore. They don't think that way. Just like you don't think, at least I don't think as I did as a high school kid. And we all change, and I think of going to a class reunion, since it might be years between the times I go, is going to be meeting a lot of strangers whose names are vaguely familiar. Because they're all different people than what we knew them as. And he says that he kept the group of those converts together, the group of his friends, and she served them as a mother, and she served them as a daughter would, and taught them all how to be gracious. And chapter 10 is a wonderful chapter on talking about God and just soaring into the presence, the reality of the presence of God. You might call it resting in the Spirit, only I don't think they fell to the floor. They just swooned in the presence of God. And I like the way Augustine describes this experience. And it was, the last time he was with his mother, and it was just a wonderful way for God to end their relationship. It's a wonderful paragraph, chapter to read. Chapter 10. As the day approached on which she was to depart this life, a day you well knew, but we did not, it happened, I believe, by your secret arrangement, that she and I stood alone, leaning in a certain window which looked into the garden of the house where we were staying at Ostia. There, removed from the noise of men, we were resting ourselves from the fatigue of a long journey in preparation for the sea voyage. We were talking together by ourselves very pleasantly and forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth to those things which are before. We were discussing in the presence of the truth, which you are, what the nature of the eternal life of the saints was to be, which eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man. But yet we thirsted with the mouth of our hearts after those heavenly streams of your fountain, the fountain of life, which is with you, so that being sprinkled from that fountain as freely as we could receive, we might in some way meditate on so high a mystery. And so they were talking about the afterlife. What happens after we die? What is heaven like? What is eternity like? And that's what they were talking about. And our conversation brought us to that point, that the very highest delight of the earthly senses in the very purest material light was, in comparison of the sweetness of that eternal light, not only not worthy to be compared with it, but not even worthy of mention. Our hearts were lifted to an even more ardent love toward that very life. And by degrees we passed through all things bodily, even the very heavens, from whence sun and moon and stars shine upon the earth. Yes, we were soaring even higher, by inward thought and discourse, admiring your works. And we came to our own minds, and went beyond them, that we might arrive at that region of never-failing plenty, where you feed Israel forever with the food of truth, and where life is that very wisdom by whom all things were made, both things that have been and things that shall be. Wisdom is not created, however, but is what is, always has been, and ever shall be. Yes, rather was or will be are not in it, but only is, because it is eternal. For was and will be are not eternal. And while we were talking and longing after wisdom, we barely touched it with the whole effort of our heart. And we sighed and left bound there the first fruits of the Spirit, and returned to the sound of language again, where the word spoken has a beginning and an end. And what is like your word, O Lord, who continues in himself without becoming old and makes all things new? We were saying then, let the tumult of the flesh be hushed. Let the image of the earth be hushed, and the waters and the air hushed also be the poles of heaven. Let the very soul be hushed to itself, and so by not thinking on self, rise above itself. Hushed be all dreams and imaginary revelations, every tongue and every sign, and whatever exists only in transition. If those things can be hushed, which say, we did not make ourselves, but he made us, who abides forever. Let them too be hushed, having roused only our ears to him who made them, and let him speak alone. Let him alone speak, not by them, but by himself, that we may hear his word, not through any tongue of flesh, not through an angel's voice, nor the sound of thunder, nor in the dark riddle of